Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we are going to be tackling something that I think a lot of people have trouble with. How do you measure success with PLM implementations? It's not like getting a new coffee machine and saying, oh, wow, this thing makes my latte so much faster.
Right.
We're diving into a study here based on Alcatel Alenia Space Italia.
Okay.
They're the folks that build these incredible spacecraft modules.
Right.
But this study really gets into the meat of how do you measure the success.
Well, you hit the nail on the head when you said it's not like a coffee machine. It's a much more strategic initiative. So you're not going to see the benefits, like an immediate ROI. Like, did revenue jump up by 10% because we installed this PLM system? It often takes years for those strategic benefits to appear.
Right. And it's a phased approach. You're implementing in different parts of the company over time, so it's really hard to see that before and after.
Right. Exactly. It's hard to isolate the impact, to say, oh, this is directly attributable to the PLM system, because it's usually part of a much larger, strategic initiative.
So how do they get around this in the study?
Well, what they did is they focused on what they could measure immediately. So those short-term wins or benefits, that could be measured quickly.
I like it. Low-hanging fruit.
Exactly. Yeah, the low-hanging fruit. And then, of course, all of those accumulate and contribute to those longer-term benefits that are much more difficult to measure, especially early on.
So we are talking about a company that makes incredibly complex, customized products.
Yes.
It's not like they're just stamping out the same, paper clip over and over.
Right.
It's really specialized stuff.
Yeah, highly specialized, very complex. And, when you think about spacecraft modules, the level of precision required is extraordinary. So any little error can have huge consequences.
Sure.
So, the researchers really had to take that into account when they were designing their study. They had to tailor their approach to fit this unique environment. And that's where KPIs come in, key performance indicators.
Right. It's how you track your progress towards a specific goal, and it's something that we can measure.
Exactly. It's a quantifiable way to track progress and measure success.
So in this case, how did they even decide what KPIs to even look at?
Well, first, they focused on data and configuration management processes, because those were the areas that were first impacted by the PLM rollout at Alcatel Alenia Space. And for a company like that, building highly complex products, getting a handle on data and configuration management is absolutely mission critical.
Yeah. I can only imagine if you're sending something up to space and you have the wrong spec for a certain part.
Right, exactly. It's not like you can just, recall it easily and fix it. So you've got to get it right the first time. And that's where PLM can really play a huge role.
So walk me through how they actually selected the KPIs.
So they were very deliberate about this. They had these 5 categories: quality, time, infrastructure, communication, and cost. Very broad categories. But then here's the really smart part. They surveyed all the personnel involved across the entire product lifecycle. So that means engineers, designers, manufacturing folks, everyone who touches the product. They got their input on which KPIs would be most meaningful in measuring the impact of PLM.
So they went right to the source.
Exactly. They went right to the source. And then, to add even more rigor to the process, they assessed each KPI based on 5 criteria: significance, measurability, reliability, feedback rate, and visibility.
Wow. So they were messing around.
No, they were very thorough. They wanted to make sure they were tracking metrics that truly reflected the impact of the PLM system, and that the data they collected was actually meaningful and useful. And that sets the stage for a much more robust analysis of how those short-term improvements can ultimately lead to long-term ROI.
That makes a lot of sense. So, okay, we've got these carefully chosen KPIs.
Right.
We're ready to see them in action. What was the next step?
Well, now we get to the really exciting part. We get to dive into the Alcatel Alenia space case study itself. So they implemented this platform called WAND, which stands for Wide Alenia Space Network Data, and they analyzed 4 different projects to assess the impact of this platform.
Okay, so it's time for the real-world test.
Exactly, the real-world test. So the 4 projects were ATV, which provides logistical support to the International Space Station, NODO2 and NODO3, which are both space station modules, and then MPLM, which is this pressurized module that's used to transport things to and from the space station.
So like the space station's moving van.
Exactly, like a moving van for the space station. Pretty cool, huh?
I love it.
And what's really interesting is that 2 of the projects NODO3 and ATV, they used WAND, and the other two, NODO2 and MPLM, they didn't.
Ah, so a nice little side-by-side comparison.
Exactly. So this with and without approach allows for a much clearer picture of WAND's true impact. It helps to isolate the variables and really understand what's driving those improvements.
So by comparing the projects, we can see how the KPIs actually played out in the real world.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be looking at next. We're going to see how those carefully selected KPIs performed and how they help to paint a picture of WAND's impact on those 4 projects.
This is really getting interesting. What did they find?
Well, let's start with something that I'm sure every project manager out there can relate to: change management.
Yeah, because change is inevitable, especially in complex projects.
Absolutely. Change is a constant, especially in an industry like aerospace, where complexity is just part of the game. So the study focused on 3 key document types related to change management: requests for waiver, or RFWs, requests for deviation, or RFDs, and engineering change proposals, or ECPs.
So basically, any time they needed to make a change, they had to generate some paperwork.
Exactly, and that paperwork can quickly pile up. So here's where those carefully chosen KPIs come in. The projects that used WAND saw a significant reduction in all 3 document types, a 50% reduction to be exact.
Okay, 50%, that's huge.
Yeah.
But what does that actually mean on the ground? Why should we care about less paperwork?
Well, it's not just about less paperwork, it's about what that reduction represents. Fewer of those documents mean fewer changes overall. And fewer changes translate to lower development costs and a faster time to market. That's where we start to see that connection between those short-term KPIs and that long-term goal of a positive ROI.
I see. So it's not just about saving trees, it's about saving time and money.
Exactly. It's about efficiency. And when you're dealing with complex projects, any efficiency gains can have a significant impact on the bottom line. But it's not just about the number of changes. They also looked at when those changes were happening.
Ah, okay. So not just how many, but when.
Right. And this is really important. Before PLM was implemented, most of the changes were happening late in the project lifecycle, which, as you can imagine.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. Making big changes late in the game. That's super costly and risky.
Absolutely. It can be a disaster. Imagine trying to redesign a critical component when the spacecraft is almost ready for launch.
Yeah, that would be bad. Talk about a budget blowout.
Exactly. But with WAND in place, they saw a shift. More of those changes were happening earlier in the process, specifically during those key milestones, like the preliminary design review, PDR, and the critical design review, CDR.
So basically, they were catching those potential problems early on before they became major headaches.
Precisely. WAND was like a proactive problem solver, helping to smooth out the workflow and ultimately contributing to those cost and time savings we talked about.
So smoother workflow, fewer changes, less rework, better ROI. I like it.
It's all connected, and it all points back to that initial investment in PLM.
This is giving me a much clearer understanding of how these KPIs actually work in the real world. We've talked about change management, but what about that other mountain we have to climb? The mountain of documents.
Yes, document management. That's a critical aspect of any complex project, and especially in aerospace. I mean, the amount of documentation involved is just staggering.
It's like a whole library dedicated to each project.
It's crazy. And if you don't have a good system for managing all those documents, it can quickly become overwhelming.
So how did WAND help with this? Did it make a difference?
Oh, huge difference. They saw a 75% reduction in document distribution time.
Wow. That's incredible. So no more waiting days for a critical document to make its way through the system.
Exactly. And it's not just about saving time, it's about improving efficiency and productivity. And they also saw a 67% reduction in document change time and a 43% reduction in approval time.
So basically, it streamlined the entire document handling process from start to finish.
Precisely. And that all translates to saved time, saved money, and a more efficient workflow, all contributing to a better ROI.
Okay, so I think I'm finally starting to see the light here. Those short-term KPIs are really telling a story about the impact of PLM.
They are, and they're giving us a glimpse into how those short-term improvements can ultimately lead to those long-term benefits that we're all after, a positive return on investment.
Now, you mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about some actual numbers.
Yes, the cold, hard numbers.
This is where things get really interesting.
It is, because we can actually start to quantify the ROI.
Okay, let's dive in.
All right, let's crunch some numbers. Okay, so remember, that 16% reduction in project time we saw. Imagine you have a team of 50 people.
Okay.
And they're each producing, let's say, 2 documents a day.
So that's 100 documents a day.
Yeah, exactly. 100 documents a day. Now, if you can shave 16% off that time.
That's a lot of time saved.
It is. And time is money, right? That freed up time can be used for other things like improving quality, maybe exploring new ideas, or even just getting ahead of schedule.
Right, has a ripple effect.
It does. And think about all that document printing they were doing. Wand allowed them to go almost completely paperless. They saw a 90% cost saving in printing alone.
90%. Wow. I bet the accounting department was thrilled.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they were popping champagne corks over there. And those are just two examples. The study highlights a lot of other areas where one led to really tangible cost and time savings, and it all goes back to those KPIs. They were able to pinpoint the areas where they could make the biggest impact and then track their progress.
So it seems like the big takeaway here is that even though measuring the total ROI of PLM is tricky, focusing on these short-term KPIs can really give you valuable insights.
Exactly. It's like having a roadmap, you know? You identify those key metrics that are most relevant to your specific situation, you track them diligently, and then you use that data to make informed decisions about how to optimize your PLM system and maximize its impact.
And the impact goes beyond just dollars and cents, right?
Absolutely. We're talking about better change management, improved document control, and a more efficient and collaborative way of working overall.
Almost like PLM becomes this invisible force that's guiding the entire process toward greater efficiency.
That's a great way to put it. But, you know, we've been talking a lot about Alcatel Alenia space, which is fascinating, but I'm curious, what are some of the broader takeaways from this study? What can our listeners, you know, maybe even in different industries, take away from this?
That's a really good question. And I think one of the biggest takeaways is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to KPIs. It really depends on your specific business goals in your industry.
Right. Context is everything. A KPI that might be crucial for an aerospace company might be completely irrelevant for a fashion retailer.
Right. Exactly. So it's all about choosing those KPIs that are going to be most impactful for your organization.
Yeah, and I think the study also highlights the importance of having a systematic approach to measurement. It's not enough to just track some random numbers.
Yes, you need a plan.
You need a plan. You need to establish clear baselines, define your methodologies, and make sure that your data is accurate.
Because if you have bad data, you're going to get bad results.
Garbage in, garbage out. That's the saying, right?
Exactly. And another thing that really stood out to me is that measuring ROI is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
Yes, absolutely. As your PLM system matures and your business needs evolve, you need to be willing to adapt to your KPIs and your measurement strategies.
So stay flexible.
Yeah. Stay agile, stay flexible, and always be looking for ways to improve.
So we've been talking a lot about this case study, which focuses on a very specific industry, aerospace.
Right.
But I can't help but wonder, where else might we see similar benefits from a well-implemented PLM system? And how might they measure that impact? Like, what other industries could really benefit from this?
Oh, I think the possibilities are huge. I mean, look at the automotive industry.
Okay.
They face a lot of the same complexities as aerospace. You know, complex product designs, global supply chains, tons of regulatory requirements. PLM can be a game changer for them.
For sure. Yeah. Especially now with all the innovations in electric vehicles and autonomous driving.
Exactly. The need for efficient data management and collaboration is only going to increase. And then there's the medical device industry. They have to deal with incredibly strict regulations, intricate designs, and the need for traceability throughout the entire product lifecycle. PLM can help them ensure patient safety, meet those regulatory demands, and just streamline the entire development process.
Yeah, and it seems like almost every industry is dealing with this convergence of physical products and digital technology.
Right. The Internet of Things, everything's connected, everything's generating data.
It's like the lines between hardware and software are getting blurrier every day.
They are. And PLM is evolving to manage all of that. It's becoming the central nervous system for the entire product experience, from design and manufacturing to data analytics and customer engagement.
So it's not just about managing the physical product anymore.
It's about managing the digital twin, the virtual representation of the product, and all the data that goes along with it.
Wow, that's a lot of data.
It is, but that data is gold. It can be used to track customer usage patterns, optimize product performance, and just make better decisions overall.
It's really exciting to think about the possibilities.
It is, but we also have to acknowledge that PLM implementation is not always a walk in the park.
Yeah.
There can be some serious challenges along the way.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Things like resistance to change.
Yeah, people are often resistant to change. And then there's the whole challenge of integrating PLM with all those legacy systems that companies already have in place.
Right, and let's not forget about scope creep, where projects just keep growing and growing.
Oh, yeah, scope creep is a killer. It can derail even the best laid plans.
So you really need to have a clear vision from the start.
You need a strong vision, strong leadership, and a really well-defined roadmap for implementation. But, even with all the challenges, the Alcatel Alenia space case shows us that it's worth it.
Yeah, the benefits can be huge.
They can be transformative. And that's what makes PLM so exciting. It has the potential to revolutionize the way companies operate.
Well, on that note, let's bring it back to our listeners for a moment.
Yeah, let's make it personal. What can they take away from all of this?
Right. I mean, we've been talking about this case study in all these different industries, but how can our listeners apply these insights to their own work?
That's the million-dollar question, right? How do we make this relevant to them?
Exactly. So, listeners, as we continue this deep dive, I want you to think about your own organization. What are your biggest challenges in managing your product lifecycle?
What are your pain points?
And how could you potentially use PLM and these KPIs we've been talking about to improve things?
To drive innovation and create value for your company.
Keep those questions in mind. We'll be coming back to them later. Are you ready to jump back into the Alcatel Alenia space case?
I am. I'm especially interested in learning more about how they tackled the data management challenge. Because, as we all know, data is the lifeblood of any PLM system.
It is. Let's dive in. Right. So we've talked about the KPIs they used and the amazing results they saw. But how did they actually wrangle all that data? Especially in such a complex environment. I mean, their system, Wand, it wasn't just about storing data, right?
Right. It was all about making that data accessible and, useful. They built this robust document management system that streamlined everything. Document creation, distribution, change management, approvals all in one central location.
So no more digging through emails trying to find the latest version of a document. I bet that was a nightmare before.
Oh, I can only imagine. With Wand, they had a single source of truth for all their project information. Everyone was working from the same up-to-date data, which, as we've talked about, is absolutely critical when you're dealing with something as complex as building a spacecraft.
Right. One tiny error with outdated information could be disastrous.
Exactly. No room for error when you're sending something into space.
So besides just centralizing everything, what were some of the key features of Wand that made this level of data management possible?
Well, one of the big things was their focus on product traceability. So they could track the history of every single component, every change made to the product throughout its entire life cycle.
So if there was a problem, they could trace it back to the source and figure out what went wrong.
Yeah, exactly, like a detective following a trail of clues. And not only is that helpful for problem solving, it's also essential for meeting those stringent industry regulations and ensuring compliance at every stage of the process.
Right, compliance is a big deal in aerospace. You can't afford to cut corners when you're building something that's going to be launched into space.
Absolutely. And, from an ROI perspective, avoiding those costly mistakes and delays due to compliance issues, that's a huge win.
It all makes sense. Now, did Juan do anything to help with collaboration between all the different teams? Because I imagine that could be a challenge in itself with so many people involved.
Oh, absolutely. Wand facilitated seamless collaboration. It allowed engineers, designers, manufacturing personnel, everyone to access the information they needed when they needed it, no matter where they were.
So no more information silos, everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And that led to a much more integrated and efficient workflow, which, as we've seen, translated into some significant time and cost savings.
And I bet it helped to boost team morale, too. Nobody likes feeling out of the loop or having to waste time chasing down information.
You're absolutely right. A happy team is a productive team. And by providing everyone with the right tools and information, Wand helped to create a much more collaborative and positive work environment.
This is all sounding pretty impressive. But let's be real. Were there any challenges they faced? I mean, implementing a system like Wand, it couldn't have been easy.
Of course there were challenges. No major implementation goes perfectly smoothly. They had to deal with some resistance to change from employees who were used to doing things the old way.
Yeah, change can be tough, especially when it involves learning a whole new system.
For sure. And integrating Wand with all those legacy systems, that was no easy feat either. It required careful planning, lots of data migration, and a whole lot of testing to make sure everything works seamlessly.
So a pretty big undertaking.
It was. But as the Alcatel Alenia space case shows, if you do it right, the rewards can be huge.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into PLM, KPIs, and ROI, what are some of the key things our listeners should take away from this? What can they apply to their own organizations?
Well, I think the Alcatel Alenia space story really illustrates that PLM is more than just a software solution. It's a strategic framework for managing your entire product lifecycle.
It's about optimizing those processes, connecting the dots, and driving innovation.
Exactly. And, the key to unlocking all those benefits is to choose the right KPIs for your specific needs, track them carefully, and use that data to make informed decisions about your PLM system.
And remember, whether you're building spacecraft or designing the next hit smartphone, those fundamental principles apply. It's about continuous improvement.
Absolutely. It's a journey.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Big thanks to you for sharing your expertise and to all of you for tuning in.
It was a pleasure being here.
Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with your colleagues. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with PLM.